NATO says Canada finally met a key commitment by spending roughly 2% of its GDP on defense in the last fiscal year, a goal set back in 2014. Christian Leuprecht, a professor of political science at the Royal Military at Queen's University, joins us for this update, and it's important. Thanks so much for joining us, Professor.
My pleasure. Hello.
How significant is it that we now meet NATO's benchmark, and what does this mean?
Well, 2% has always been an arbitrary benchmark. Politicians pick it because it's a nice sort of number and it gets everybody in a common denominator. But of course, if Canada spends 2% of GDP or say Latvia spends 2% of GDP, it's going to give you very different effects. Now, of course, Latvia is spending 5% of GDP, but at least sort of it brings everybody up to sort of a common standard. And as you point out, the government will tell you they're ahead of schedule, meaning 2%. But as your intro pointed out, we agreed to this in 2014 and we dragged our feet for a decade. But it now puts at least Canada sort of in the same sort of position as almost all other NATO member countries at least meeting the minimum politically agreed upon benchmark.
Many would argue that Canada has actually lagged behind NATO's 2% target for years, something that they've actually faced criticism for from allies. First off, why did it take the country a little bit longer, and what image has it kind of given Canada?
Yeah, I mean, it's come at serious reputational cost, right? That Canada was always, I think of NATO as like a six-packs at the beer store, and you don't all like all flavors equally. And Canada was always a very well-liked flavor, and Canada increasingly got excluded from key decisions and key sort of meetings because we didn't have capabilities, and if you don't have capabilities, then you can't make commitments. So this is very important at a time, of course, when our sovereignty is under duress, because being part of these key decisions is a way of asserting our interests, not just our defense interests, but our political and our economic interests. And it's leveraging our European partners to counterbalance the vagaries of US unilateralism. So this is not just an investment in defense. This is very much an investment in Canadian sovereignty and asserting Canadian political sovereignty in a way that Canada is within the G7 and within NATO, a very significant country in terms of sort of the top half dozen countries with headquarters capabilities. And Canada always been known for being able to make commitments and doing those things on its own with the capabilities it had. It's probably going to take us a good 15 years to rebuild where the Canadian Armed Forces needs to be. So we can hope that this is not just a 1 or 2 year sort of flash in the pan, but rather a long-standing commitment to rebuilding Canada's single most important instrument of statecraft.
And as we're talking about hitting this 2% target, last year allies committed to increasing defense spending to 5% of annual GDP over the next decade. How can Canada meet this new goal if it took us so long to hit that 2% goal?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, of course, of those 5%, half of the 3% that we're missing, 1.5%, is for critical infrastructure investments. And we have lots of investments to make here, in particular in the Canadian Arctic and with regards to Canadian defense in the Arctic. So I'm quite confident we can meet that 1.5%, at least if the Prime Minister follows through on the agenda that he has set. The other 1.5% to get actual defense spending from 2 to 3.5%, that will require some very painful trade-offs, painful political trade-offs, and of course, in the current economic climate, also very painful fiscal trade-offs. We can get to 2%, I think, without making too many very hard, painful decisions, but it'll be interesting to see whether the government will be prepared to make those very painful trade-offs to get us to the 3.5% that notionally the government has committed us to. So, and that'll be, I think, a function both of the security environment and the evolving political environment.
So before we let you go, in your opinion, what do you see happening as Canada maybe works toward this next target?
Well, so we'll see whether, ultimately, we're getting the incentive because the Canadian political dimensions have also changed internally. Canadians are having different expectations, and we have some members in cabinet who are now quite favorable to defense spending. I think previously the biggest opposition to defense spending was ultimately in cabinet and in caucus. And so it'll be interesting to see whether the Prime Minister can keep cabinet and caucus on side with both his defense agenda and his economic agenda. The trade-off here is that he's basically selling a defense agenda that it appears to be more of an economic growth and innovation agenda than a defense agenda. So being able to marry that and making sure that the defense agenda actually delivers on defense signals and defense priorities, while at the same time generating the innovation and economic growth and spending that I think the Prime Minister is trying to justify with these amounts of money, that will be no easy feat, and we'll see how the Prime Minister ends up threading that needle.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thanks so much, Professor.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Christian Leuprecht, Professor of Political Science at Queen's University.